Hi, day 27 of my 30 days of React challenge, and today I have implemented nested routes and connected with a country facts API to create kind of a geography app that shows like facts of different countries and continents. So let's take a look. Okay, so here we have our home page, explore the world. If you click on countries, you get a sub-nav with different countries, which you can click on to show I have Mexico twice to show different facts. And you'll see up here, as we click, the route is changing and becoming a nested route. We also have this other path with continents, where if you click on a continent name, it's going to retrieve data of all of the different countries in that continent. This app has definitely been the biggest challenge for me yet. The combination of combining the nested routes and understanding kind of how they work, as well as using an API call, was quite tricky. I could talk for ages about this, but since I want to keep this video nice and short, I'm kind of first of all just going to kind of explain how the nested routes work in this app, and then talk about one or two of the problems I had. So I'm not going to go into detail about everything. So on app.js, my routes are pretty much the same as my last app. So we just have 3 different paths, which simply render 3 different components. When things start to get interesting is within these 2 child components here, country and continent. So let's take a look at one of those. Let's look at continents. When this component is rendered, we're also rendering these continents as a list of links which can be clicked. And when they are clicked, we are updating our URL to include like that path, which is the continent that's clicked. So if we look here, if I click Africa up here in routes, we see Africa, etc. Once that URL changes, this root path down here says, hey, okay, our URL has changed to match this, which means we need to render our continent component, which I'm also passing some extra props to here, one called current continent, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Yeah, once those links have been clicked and this continent component is rendered, that's kind of it for the nested routes. Quite straightforward on its own. Where things started to get complicated was when I decided to incorporate an API into this app as well. Okay, so where to start with my data fetching an API? I think this place is right here in the API call. It's pretty similar to other API calls I've done. One thing that is different, however, that is related to routes, to React routes, is this.props.match.params. With React Router DOM, there are a few kind of inbuilt or like special properties that are made available to us, which we can access, one of which is this match. Match basically allows us to access whatever parameters have been are set here in the route. So this .props.match.params is equivalent to Oceania in this case, which means when we call this fetch data, we fetch our data here, we're making content name equivalent to this .props.match.params, which means we're calling Oceania in our API call here, which is how we actually get the correct data that matches the correct URL, which means basically I could type anything into here. Like let's go to countries. I've only got like a few countries listed here, but I could type, say, Australia, and there we go. And I'm still going to get the information come up because the API calls are based on the URL parameters and nothing else. Which brings me to one other thing I should perhaps talk about, which is, since we jumped back into countries, if we have a look at my folder structure here for my components, we'll see we've been following my continents kind of nesting, right? So like app.js, which has continents, which within it has the child component continent. But for that countries path, it's actually I've basically kind of just duplicated this code and created like another set of like grandparent to child components. if I'd had more time in a perfect world, I could actually probably do it all through, I can do it all through the same kind of tree. But yeah, in the interest of time, I just kind of did it this way for now. So the last subject I'm going to touch on is, again, to do with the API. With React, obviously the whole point of it is that you're only loading certain parts of the DOM that you really need to each time information changes, as opposed to reloading the whole page, which is great, but it means that there are a lot of problems regarding kind of how to get exactly what you want to load and change at the right time, which I had a big problem with here. If we jump over to continent, which is our component, which is kind of handling data fetch and kind of doing the brunt of the work in this app, you'll see up here I'm calling fetch data in two lifecycle methods. So both in component.mount for when the component first mounts, and also within componentWillUpdate. The reason for this is because kind of this, each time the root path changes, or when this root path is first updated to reflect this structure, we load our continent, we're loading our continent component. The problem is, each time that route subsequently changes, this route path is saying, oh, okay, there's actually no change. The pattern still reflects what we saw before. Therefore, as far as the app's concerned, there's no reason to actually update anything within this child component. So I was having a problem where I had my data call in component did mount, and that was fine. When you first clicked on the link, all the information would load correctly. But each time you clicked on a different link, nothing would happen, because as far as this component was concerned, nothing was changed, nothing needed to be updated. So how I fixed this was kind of a bit of a strange workaround, and I'm not sure whether it's best case or not, but I was just like, okay, I need to solve this. I found out that this lifecycle method here, componentWillUpdate, is fired each time like any props are passed to a component or the state changes, and that's regardless of whether or not you actually use those props that you pass to it. So what I've done is here we are passing, if we jump back down to our continent component here, you'll see we're passing a prop, current continent, which is a state value. Each time these links are clicked, what we're doing is actually on-click firing this component, update continent, which is changing a state value, like setting the state of current continent to continent, which is this. So each time we click, this route path is saying, okay, up here in state, I can see that this property, which I previously passed in as, say, Mexico, is now France. That means that this component that I'm referring to needs to be updated, and it is then firing, because it's going to update, it's firing componentWillUpdate, refetching the data, and then reloading that component with the correct data for whichever link is clicked. Okay, that is quite enough for today. A lot of stuff missed, but yeah, that was kind of nested routes in a nutshell, and the couple of kind of pain points I had in implementing this app. Thanks for watching.